Hi, this is Professor Favors with preparing the essay for an English audience. So the goal here is to convert psychology lingo into English speak, and the target is the grit essay. The thing about when we read different sources that are not typically English-based sources, and we are required to format use of those sources, integration of those sources into an English-based essay, we have to convert the lingo. So if we were reading a psychology source, as in the grit, as in self-control and grit, or we were reading a sociology source, or even a source from another discipline like economics, business, mathematics, any of those types of sources that are not English based, not literature based, we have to take the time to convert the lingo that you see in that particular source and tailor it to an English audience, because not all English audiences will understand the purpose of a research question, or the purpose of a hypothesis, uh, the purpose of any other types of tools used within a uh, specific major or discipline. And even if we are generally familiar with, say, a research question, something to guide research, how it is presented within one discipline like psychology and how it is presented within another discipline like English are two different things, and we have to make sure that we tailor our writing, our prose, to a specific English-based audience. So this is preparing the essay for an English audience. The target, of course, is the grit essay, and we are converting psychology lingo into English speak. Some guidelines for understanding how to convert language from one discipline to the next when preparing an English essay. The self-controlling grid related but separable determinants of success is a source used in first year composition courses. It is a base source in English 1301 with a higher point value, and it is a supporting source in English 1302 with a lower point value. Students peer teach the source in English 1301 when it's a campus-based class. Students present the source in groups in English 1302 when, of course, it is also a campus-based class. The essay requires quote integration regardless of point value. So this means that students are tailoring the language to a specific audience. So what's included in this presentation? Essentially understanding the difference from psychology to English, Duckworth and Gross's purpose to an English essay thesis, Duckworth and Gross's their definitions of self-control and grit as functions that could function as English essay topic sentences, and then Duckworth and Gross's supporting evidence, the evidence that they use for self-control, the evidence that they use for grit. And then MLA formatting, first and second mention, your thesis, sample reasons as topic sentences, and then MLA formatting and indirect sources, and then lastly, formatting the works cited entry, moving from APA to MLA, because the sources that you use or read are formatted in APA, but you have to convert them to MLA for your English-based essay. So let's look at the language differences. So in psychology or any sort of social sciences type of discipline, the person or persons would be a researcher. So if you look at James J. Gross, Angela Duckworth, they would be considered researchers. When they are published, they may be perceived as scholars. But in English, the person would be considered an author. All right, so then psychology, they usually begin with the hypothesis or a research purpose, like the purpose that you're going to see in the self-controlling grit. But in English, we perceive that research purpose as a thesis, an argument, or position, and we present it that way in the English essay. Then, of course, there are research questions. We would use rhetorical questions, background research versus literary canon. So, background research, anything that you see the citations within the psychology source, self control, and grit, all of those citations represent conclusions. So, all of those individual researchers did their own individual research and came to a conclusion. Well, you can say the same thing about Angela Duckworth and James J. Gross, when you look at their thesis, that we are perceiving it as a thesis, self-control and grit are strongly correlated, but not perfectly so. That's a conclusion for them, but it's a thesis for us. And so then the literary canon, we don't really have to ask permission to use those works as you would have to with the background research under psychology. All we would need to do is integrate the source materials and format according to MLA. And then in psychology, it would be an experiment. Of course, in English is standard outlining. Psychology requires the approval of human subjects. Our subjects are literary figures and readings. And then psychologists test hypotheses. Our goal is to prove the thesis. And then at the end of their research and all of their testing and all of their human subjects and experiment and considering the background research and testing their research questions and hypotheses, etc., then they would report findings. So what we get now in terms of reading their work is a report of their findings, is a report of their activities concerning that particular topic, and they can represent conclusions on the topic. And then in English, we are essentially building and sustaining the argument. So if we begin with an argument that all dogs are nice, we sustain that argument all the way to the very end, all dogs are nice. However, if we begin with all dogs are nice, but we get to the end and we say all dogs are nice if they lick your face, that's a condition on the original statement. So that is not sustaining the argument. So in English, we are looking to create an argument, or an arguable thesis, or provable thesis, and then we go through the task of integrating evidence, claim, counterclaim, evidence, and rebuttal, going back and forth, and then sustaining the argument at the very end. At Duckworth and Gross's research purpose to thesis. So the research purpose that you see in the psychology source becomes a thesis and topic sentence for us in English. So the thesis is self-control and grit are strongly correlated, but not perfectly so. That also represents a conclusion for their research. And then it is formatted according to MLA, Duckworth and Gross 319. In MLA, we do not use year, we do not use comma. And then topic sentences would be two, because the immediate thesis focuses on self-control and grit. So then we're looking for those areas of the source that represent or that would support that particular research purpose. And so the research purpose is to look at the correlation between self-control and grit. Okay, so for example, self-control is the capacity to regulate attention, emotion, and behavior in the presence of temptation. And then we are using brackets, and there is also an MLA topic on this in eCampus. We're using brackets because the immediate source has a hyphen, a dash or a hyphen, and we have to make sure that the sentence is still grammatically correct. So we add brackets when we want to ensure a form of grammatical consistency. So that's self-control. And then grit is the tenacious pursuit of a dominant superordinate goal despite setbacks. And so we're using also brackets here. So the thesis or the research purpose that we're calling a thesis is focusing on two concepts, self-control and grit. The topic sentences that we can quote from the immediate source is focusing also on self-control and grit. So types of supporting evidence is essentially definition of self-control, definition of grit, definition of hierarchical goal framework. And then, of course, examples of self-control, examples of grit. And then the hierarchical goal framework provides a visual as well as an example. So supporting evidence, self-control with examples. So this is two screenshots. And so in the abstract, the authors, Angela Duckworth and James J. Gross, has defined self-control multiple times. The first one being the capacity to regulate attention, emotion, and behavior in the presence of temptation. And if you go down a little bit towards the end, self-control entails aligning actions with any valued goal despite momentarily more alluring alternatives. And then we get into the context, the first paragraph. And they were defining in terms of using examples self-control. Self-control is associated with positive life outcomes. So that's about 4 lines down. And then understanding that positive life outcomes is a kind of broad term. So we need to define it a little bit more. And they are defining it. If you see that sentence, prospective longitudinal studies, well, they're saying that self-control, in terms of being associated with positive life outcomes, is will predict later academic achievement and attainment. So that's at least one positive life outcome. Skipping down a little bit, and you'll see it would also produce employment, earnings, savings, physical health, and then skip down a little bit to general intelligence and socioeconomic status. So in their example, they're giving you context, but they work like examples within uh, their work in terms of understanding self-control. If they just say you just need self-control and not give you, particular examples, it wouldn't make sense to you how then self-control is associated with positive life outcomes. They do the very same thing with grit. In the same abstract, they are defining grit. So with about the 4 lines down, grit is the tenacious pursuit of a dominant superordinate goal despite setbacks. And then skipping down a little bit more to the last 3 lines, grit in contrast entails having and working assiduously toward a single challenging superordinate goal through thick and thin on a time scale of years or even decades. So this is how they are defining grit within the context of the work. So then they get into examples of what grit looks like in the same way that they do with self-control. So if you look at the second sentence, grit and related constructs are associated with lifetime educational attainment, skip, and then lifetime educational attainment and professional success. It's a little bit more specific than the previous example, but how they define lifetime educational attainment and professional success, they use actual examples. So, for instance, uh, grittier high school juniors, grittier cadets, grittier novice teachers, and they get into more examples in the next paragraph that follows. But in Whereas with the self-control, they give you positive life outcomes and sort of categories. For grit, they're giving you specific types of people who tend to be grittier after effortful, focused, deliberate practice and development of skill. Here's the hierarchical goal framework with the visual that you will see in the source. And so they are further defining it. If you see about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down where you see we assume that goals are typically organized hierarchically with lower order goals serving higher order goals. Lower order goals are more numerous, context specific, short term, and substitutable, whereas higher order goals are typically fewer in number, more abstract, more enduring, and more important to the individual. So this is the true definition of the hierarchical goal framework visual that you see here, that there are multiple actions that you can take, but they're all linked to lower order goals. And then those lower order goals are higher order goals. And as you continue, you can do more substituting with the lower order goals. But once you get to high order, you have to focus because then you are closer to your goal. So let's reference the parts for English as a recap. So authors' conclusions with topic sentences. Remember that the thesis that we are perceiving as a thesis, which is really their conclusion. Self-control and grit are strongly correlated, but not perfectly so. And then, of course, the topic sentences that we could use, or we are suggesting that they function as topic sentences within an English essay, the definitions of self-control, and then the definition of grit. So then the supporting evidence would be first definition, self-control, second definition, grit, third definition, hierarchical goal framework, and then examples of self-control, examples of grit, and then of course you have the visual. All right, so let's look at MLA formatting in terms of first and second mention. Source for the very first time in your essay, you have to be sure that you provide a first mention. So that's full names of author, full titling of work. And once you have introduced, then you can abbreviate by referencing their last names never the first, and then an abbreviated version of the title. So Duckworth and Gross research purpose in psychology. There's the thesis again, and this purpose for conducting research. It likely began as a hypothesis and or research question. What you read here represents the author's conclusions. They are concluding that we should not define the two terms as the same. And then when you're looking at the conclusions in an English essay, we present it as a thesis, as their argument. So really, we have a thesis for our paper, but when we present the source, it's going to present similarly to an argument. So we're doing a first mention. So in Angela Duckworth and James J. Gross's article titled Self-Control and Grit, Related but Separable Determinants of Success, they conclude that self-control and grit are strongly correlated, but not perfectly so. So again, we're using brackets because if you look at the initial quote, it begins with a capital letter for the S in self-control. But when you integrate it within the middle of a sentence, you write, they conclude that, then it still has to be grammatically correct. So that means we need to lowercase the S. However, if you wrote they state, comma, then you wouldn't have to need the brackets and you can continue on as you see with the original quote. All right, so this is the first mention full names of authors and full titling of work. And when we mention the names at the beginning of the sentence line, we do not need their names in the parentheses that you see there. We just need the page number 319. So let's do a second mention. So if we're looking at one of the researcher's topic sentence on self-control, and this is a definition specific to the immediate text. It is not a synthesis or summary from a dictionary. So we always want to stay within the immediate text, how the authors, how the researchers, how the scholars are defining a particular term within their work. So then if we want to integrate that, their definition into our paper, we can do a second mention. Usually the abbreviated form of the title would be self-controlling grit if we decided to add it here. So in the article, the researchers define self-control as the capacity to regulate attention, emotion, and behavior in the presence of temptation. Duckworth and Gross, 319. So in other words, we did not mention Duckworth and Gross at the beginning of the sentence line, so we need to be sure that we add them at the end of the sentence line. In addition, when we are defining terms within the context of the work, we are formatting self-control in quotation marks, and then the exact wording of the definition in quotation marks, okay? The capacity to regulate attention. And then use of researchers is fine for an English essay. We would usually refer to them as authors. Researchers can still be appropriate English speak. So looking at your thesis is going to be an answer to the actual prompt question on your English assignment sheet. So be sure to refer to your English assignment sheet. So the writing prompt question, after all of the setup, the topic setup, the concept setup, you get a question at the end of the English assignment sheet. Do you think grit is a predictor of academic, professional, and personal success? So reference to and requires consideration of all three. So you can't just, and is not an or in this question. You have to address all three. So here's a way to address all three when you are thinking about reasons and answering the question in a direct way. So grit is a predictor of academic success. So these could function as topic sentences. Grit is a predictor of professional success. But then you could deviate and say grit is not a predictor of personal success. Self-control is necessary, right? And you would just have to provide examples for all three. But then you could still argue that grit is a predictor of academic success if you believe that, right? But the most important thing is that you are addressing all three elements of that prompt question. Adding the in-text citation, so we need to move from APA to MLA. So when you are citing indirect sources, so all of the sources that you see referenced, that Angela Duckworth and James J. Gross reference within their article, those are considered indirect sources to you. They researched those sources, they read those sources, they synthesized those sources. You did not. Your only main source is self-control and grit. So then when you represent them in your paper, they are considered indirect and you have to do it appropriately. So you must use MLA for your English essay. For example, you would refer to Duckworth and Gross after quoting or paraphrasing with just the author's name and page number and ending with a punctuation mark. So as you see here, Duckworth and Gross, 319. The base source, however, uses APA. Duckworth and Gross's article is written for a psychology and possibly a sociology audience. The citation requires the author's name plus comma plus year. So Duckworth and Gross, comma 2014. That's what APA does. However, you are formatting your paper for MLA. So for an essay formatted for MLA, you must use appropriate citation conventions. You are using Duckworth and Gross 319 formatting convention. Purdue Owl, you should be able to click this once you download, but provides, well, MLA really provides a definition of what it means to cite an indirect source. So sometimes you may have to use an indirect source. An indirect source is a source cited within another source. For such indirect quotations, use quoted in. You don't need the quotation marks as you see here. It's just for demonstration purposes to indicate the source you actually consulted. So, for example, Ravitch argues that high schools are presumed to act as social service centers, and they don't do that well. So that is a quoted text, but that information comes from Weissman 259. So it's quoted in Weissman 259, understanding that MLA does not utilize year, and there's no comma there, just page number. Note that in most cases, a responsible researcher will attempt to find the original source rather than citing an indirect source. And you can do that. You can always click those links. The self-control and grit source is available online, and you can easily click those links and access those sources, as long as you don't need a subscription. So citing in indirect sources, you can quote it in for MLA. So here's the Duckworth and Gross's article in APA format. So all of these source materials that you see here, they're all reference hyperlink. Those are AP. The whole thing is formatted in APA format. But when you cite it in MLA, and I particularly use this example because of the difficulty and because in certain ways it can be annoying, but this should help you to understand. So if you look at the first sentence that we're taking the information from is actually the second sentence. Grit and related constructs are associated with lifetime educational attainment. So then you have those cited sources, and professional success, and then you have those cited sources. So again, remember that what you see here are conclusions from other sources that Angela Duckworth and James J. Gross are citing within their work. So let's take it a little. Duckworth and Gross discuss grit as being associated with lifetime educational attainment. So remember, we are beginning a quote because these are not our words. But what you see there, Duckworth and Quinn, 2009, is going to convert to quoted in Duckworth and Quinn 2009. Now we don't have a page number for the source, so we actually have to use 2009 here, but we don't need to put a comma there because this is not APA format. And then and professional success, and that ends the official quoted material. But we still have the task of referencing the indirect sources that you see there, that Baum and Locke 2004, Locke and Latham 2013, Valorand, Hulford and Forrest 2014, and then Rosinsky 2012. So then for all of that information, it's still quoted in Baum and Locke 2004, no comma, Locke and Latham 2013, and all are separated with a semicolon. Valorand and Helford and Forrest 2014, and then the last one 2012. We use the coordinating conjunction and. The APA, if you look at it, APA uses the ampersand. So their ampersand becomes our and. Okay, so this is, you'll be able to download this and see it closer. So formatting the works cited entry, moving from APA to MLA. So we have formatting for electronic sources. There's the APA, and then there's the MLA. So an article from an online periodical with the DOI assigned. So the DOI is defined as digital object identifier. It's just a quicker way to create a shortened URL or website address. So then we have last name, comma, F period, M period, comma, ampersand, last name, comma, F period, M period, year, title of article, is not formatted in quotation marks, title of article. That article is housed within a periodical, title of periodical, volume, issue, page numbers, and then DOI. And so you see here, there is an example. Then for MLA, an article in an online scholarly journal, the DOI is use of the DOI is predicated on whether or not there is a DOI under MLA. So for all online scholarly journals, provide the author's name, the name of the article in quotation marks, the title of the publication in italics, all volume and issue numbers, and the year of publication. Include a DOI if available, otherwise provide a URL or permalink to help readers locate the source. So essentially the URL is a website address that you got the article from. And then article in an online only scholarly journal. So MLA requires a page range for articles that appear in scholarly journals. If the journal you are citing appears exclusively in an online format, there is no, meaning that there is no corresponding print publication that does not make use of page numbers, indicate the URL or other location information. So let's look at the example. So Dobie, Nadine, Dobie, comma, Nadine, period. The article title is formatted in quotation marks, research in youth culture and policy, current conditions and future directions, period, and then close quotation marks. So that article then is housed in a particular online scholarly journal titled Social Work and Society, the International Online Only Journal. And then it's a volume number, volume 6, number 2, year of publication 2008, and then there is a URL or website address. And then for MLA, you provide the access date, so whenever you access the information. So let's look at the Duckworth and Gross source, just the first parts of the information. So we have the title, Self-Control and Grit, Related but Separable Determinants of Success. In MLA, you would format that in quotation marks. Also remember that Angela Duckworth is first author, James J. Gross is second author, so you do not change their positions. If you click the link, once you access the article online, current directions in psychological science, you'll see the full periodical or online scholarly journal. And so the date of publication is 2014, October 23/5, that's volume 23, issue number 5, and then page count is paginated 319 to 325, and then there's a DOI there. So let's look at APA with DOI. So Duckworth and Gross source, same screenshot here. And then you see how it's Duckworth, comma, A period, comma, and then the ampersand Gross, comma, J period, J period, and then the year of publication 2014. With APA, you do not format the title in quotation marks. So it's just a straight self-control and grit. All of the major letters are lowercase except for the one right before the colon and the one right after it. And then this article is housed in Current Directions in Psychological Science. So then it is volume 23, issue number 5, paginated 319, 325, and then there is a DOI information there. APA for Duckworth and Gross, then Duckworth and Gross, self-control agreement, same information. So let's look at electronic sources, MLA with DOI, same screenshot, but then you spell out names of the authors, and then the ampersand changes to an and. So Duckworth, comma, Angela, and James J. Gross. And then for MLA, you are formatting the title in quotation marks, and all major words are capitalized. So if you see self-control and grit, related but separable determinants of success, you're going to see also that article housed within current directions in psychological science, and that's volume 23, number 5, 2014. So whereas you saw 23 and then parentheses 5, you're actually spelling out VOL period 23, comma, NO period, NO period 5, and then the year of publication, DOI. And notice that this was accessed 20 February 2023. So let's recap MLA for Duckworth and Gross, right? So same thing, article in an online scholarly journal, formatted appropriately. And then look at the side-by-side comparison. So if you are writing and formatting a paper for MLA, the last page of the paper would be titled References. But if you are formatting for MLA, the last page of your paper would be formatted Works Cited. So then you see that the APA style here off to the left, and then you see the MLA style off to the right. Just notice the differences that in APA, you don't spell out the first names and you are using ampersand as well as a comma. You also bring in year of publication. Everything else tends to be the same except for the title. You don't format it in quotation marks and major words or lower. I mean, non-major words or lowercase. In MLA style, you are is spelling out the names of the authors. There's no ampersand or comma. You don't need a year of publication right after the names. The title is formatted in quotation marks, of course, and that information is housed within the larger journal, Current Directions in Psychological Science, with volume, issue, uh, publication year, and then access date here. Okay, so your next steps then will be begin drafting the grid essay. You will have a full process with that, so I decided to remove many of the required materials I typically use so you can actually spend more time drafting. So then you are converting psychology lingo to English speak in your English essay. You are formatting all citations for MLA. You are referencing all indirect citations, what Duckworth and Gross use using quoted in, and then you are creating the works cited page formatted for MLA. You should not title the last page references. Therefore, do not mix APA and MLA. This presentation is for demonstration purposes. So this presentation is essentially helping you to convert psychology lingo into English speak for an essay.